The Migration Story, First Leaders of the Chickasaw and Choctaw. An ancient story passed down from generation to generation of Chickasaw people. Centuries ago, there lived somewhere in the West a tribe, and hostile tribes constantly warred upon them. Because of the never-ending attacks, they enjoyed little of the peace and comfort they so deeply desired. In time, our ancestors became so weary and heavy-hearted that they appealed to our wise hapai, or prophets, to find a solution to the problem. Our hapai held a special consultation. They sat around the council fire and deliberated for many hours, and most importantly, they sought guidance from our Creator, Abba Bini Li, who created all things and sat above the clouds and directed the destiny of all. Once they concluded their deliberations, they told our ancestors they should seek a new home where they could find peace and happiness. Their guide to the new land would be Iti Fabasa Holitopa, a pole made sacred by Abba Bini Li. At the end of each day's journey, the people should stick Iti Fabasa Holitopa into the ground so that it stood perfectly straight. Each morning, the sacred pole should be carefully examined, and whatever direction it was leaning in would be the way they would travel. They were to repeat the procedure until Iti Fabasa Holitupa no longer leaned in any direction. When that happened, our ancestors would know it was a divine sign from Abba Bini Li that their journey was over and they had reached their new homeland. As they discussed the journey, it was decided they should split into two groups to make traveling safer and easier. The brave young Minko Chickasaw would lead one group, and his equally brave brother, Chata, also a Minko, would lead the other. During the next few days, the families busied themselves by packing their belongings and making other necessary preparations for the trip. At last, the eve of departure arrived. That evening, the prophets stuck Iti Fabasa Holitapa into the ground and retired for the night. The next morning, at the break of day, the sacred pole was carefully inspected and found to be leaning towards the east. So, with Chickasaw at the head of one of the parties and Chata at the head of the other, the group set out in the direction of the rising sun. It was a sight to behold, this great caravan of people traveling on foot, carrying all their possessions, each knowing with certainty that somewhere a new homeland awaited them and the sacred pole would lead them to it. Far in front of this procession ranged a large white dog, Ofi Tobi Ishto. He darted to the right, then to the left. He was everywhere, always on the alert. The people loved the big creature very dearly. He was their faithful guard and scout, and it was his duty to sound the alarm should enemies be encountered. Travel was slow and laborious. Sickness was a constant companion, and the tribal doctors, Alichi, kept busy with their medicine bags. But when Sinti the snake struck any one of them, Ofi Tobi Ishto was quickly summoned and only needed to lick the wound to make the victim well again. Even with the extraordinary healing powers of our Alichi and beloved Ofi Tobi Ishto, the ugly hand of death reached down into the travelers and took away loved ones at will. Then one day, just as the sun was setting, the two parties came upon a scene beyond their imagination. It was a great river, the likes of which they had never seen before. The unexpected sight overwhelmed them. For a long time, the astonished people stood on the riverbank and stared in awe at the mighty watercourse. They called the expansive river Misha Sipkini, beyond all age. Today, the great river is known far and wide as the Mississippi. That night, the family sat around their campfires and talked joyfully to one another. Many of the people believed their promised land had been reached and felt sure the sacred pole would confirm their belief at daybreak. But at sunup the next day, the people saw the Iti Fabasa Holitopa still lean toward the east, and they knew that home was somewhere on the other side of the wide river before them. The people hurriedly set about constructing rafts, and soon the crossing was underway. Almost immediately, a serious mishap occurred that left our ancestors grief-stricken. The raft carrying their beloved white dog broke into pieces in the middle of the river. Ofi Tobi Ishto, who had managed to climb onto a piece of broken timber, could not be reached. The people could only helplessly watch as he was swept downstream and out of sight. That was the last they ever saw of their faithful guard and scout. Many days were required to ferry all the people and their belongings to the opposite side, but in time they all arrived safely. The families rested by the river several days, then packed up and continued their eastward march. Some weeks later, they camped at a place that later became known as Naniwaya in what is now Winston County, Mississippi. The group became somewhat excited and uneasy, too, for they had never before seen the sacred pole behave in such a strange manner. At last, Itifabasa Holitopa grew very still and stood perfectly straight. At this point, the two brothers, Chickasaw and Choctaw, had their first difference of opinion. Minko Choctaw was quite convinced that the perfectly upright pole was the divine sign from Abba Bini Li, that they had reached their new homeland. Minko Chickasaw, on the other hand, was not at all pleased with the way the sacred pole had wobbled around, and he felt confident their new homeland lay farther toward the rising sun. The two brothers and the Hopai'i held discussions about the matter, but at the end of several hours, opinions remained unchanged. Seeing that talking was getting them no place, Minko Chickasaw pulled the sacred pole from the ground and commanded all those who believed their homeland lay farther to the east to pick up their packs and follow him. That was the beginning of the Chickasaw and Choctaw nations. From that day on, the people that followed Minko Chickasaw, who were relatively few compared to the significant number who remained in the camp, were referred to as Chickasaws, and those who stayed with Minko Choctaw were called Choctaws. After leading the Chickasaws farther eastward to various parts of what are now the states of Alabama and Georgia, Itifabasa Holitopa reversed its direction and guided the people westward to a place near the present-day towns of Pontotoc and Tupelo, Mississippi. There, less than 100 miles north of where the Choctaws had settled, the sacred pole stood straight as an arrow. The Chickasaw people then knew with certainty that at last they had found their new homeland and that their long journey was at an end.